welcome to In Pursuit of Truth. This is your host, Sir Patrick Mac, a.k.a. Perseus Maximus. So, Pursuit, it hurts. It hoits. It hoits. I got a sweet story to tell you today, and it's based off a thread that I did on Twitter yesterday. And speaking of Twitter, yours truly is back on Twitter, in case you missed this beautiful face right here. My lips are not swollen. They're plump. Anyway, my story's got mystery and intrigue and explosions and drone strikes. No, that's a dog with a Roomba. Was just kidding about that part. We do have explosions in my story, though. So grab your coffee or whatever your preferred nomenclature is, fist bump your neighbor, and let's get pursued. Before we begin, I want to turn you on to a couple of POTUS tweets and a Q proof. As you can see in this graphic right here, we have a tweet from the POTUS on January 3rd, 2020. And that, of course, would be 1320, as this Anon is pointing out. You see the Q post in the left side, 1320. And POTUS also has a timestamp of 7:44 a.m., whereas we have a timestamp of 7:44 p.m. on the other side. So it looks like we've got ourselves a little Q proof right here. And this was back from May of 2018, where Q said, "Today evil lost control. Leverage of Iran. Today POTUS took control of Iran. Today, with pending sanctions and military actions, POTUS will gain more ammunition, intel against them. Suicide watch. The deal kept Iran quiet." Referring to their nuclear deal. The goal was to keep POTUS in until impeachment term end. Bigger than people can imagine. Okay, well, amazing how relevant that all seems today, right? That is your first one and a Q proof. Now, I want to turn you on to a series of tweets. This is from the 5th of January. The United States just spent $2 trillion. Notice that $2 trillion is all capitalized, as well as military equipment. On military equipment, we are the biggest and by far the best in the world. If Iran attacks an American base or any American, we will be sending some of that brand new beautiful equipment their way, and without hesitation. Yikes! Then we get this one here. This was a part 2 of another one. Targeted 52 Iranian sites, representing the 52 American hostages taken by Iran many years ago, some at a very high level and important to Iran and the Iranian culture. And those targets and Iran itself will be hit very fast and very hard. The USA wants no more threats. Okay, so a lot of tough talk here, but also some symbolism, and it looks like a little bit of code too, right? But POTUS says that there were 52 Iranian sites. Iran says that there were 35. So that's a difference of... I know. Now look at this one from the 6th. These media posts will serve as notification to the United States Congress that should Iran strike any U.S. person or target, the United States will quickly and fully strike back, and perhaps in a disproportionate manner. Such legal notice is not required, but is given nevertheless. Okay, so we're not going to talk a ton about Iran today, although this here clearly seems to be a bit of a catalyst to a lot of other events, and we are going to talk about some of those events. But this is a very, very polarizing issue for some people for some reason. Obviously, it seems like the people of Iran are pretty celebratory over this, but it doesn't seem that way in the media. Of course, the media wants to paint this as if some sort of legend just got slain. So this is a very, very interesting situation, because now we have Democrats actually kind of supporting this guy who propagated Hezbollah, and essentially at the same time kind of having to cop to the fact that Benghazi was a massive failure. So this is a massive troll job by way of the POTUS. And of course, this is a very big deal if indeed Soleimani is dead. Now let's move on to my thread. Now at right about this moment in the program, you might be saying, "Perseus Maximus, all your threads, so dope." And I say, I know, but this one's got an explosion right at the beginning. The explosion occurred at a home in the 14400 block of Evergreen around 7:20 p.m. Saturday. Yikes. Now, I'm going to stop right there. For those of you who are not aware of what's already suspect about this story, is that it happened on Evergreen. We've talked a lot about Evergreen on my channel. If you're not familiar with the reference, we're not going to go way into it today, but throughout this thread, I am going to provide you some source videos you can check out from my channel. But Evergreen, number one, was the Secret Service code name of one Hillary Clinton. We've seen Evergreen pop up quite a bit in tweets and all kinds of story references. This is another one. Evergreen also refers to a shipping line and a CIA airline, which I talked about a couple shows back. Now, I'm not going to go way into Evergreen right now. I just want to memorize you of that so you see that there's an obvious reference. But this was an explosion in Detroit. This is from WXYZ.com. 6 injured following house explosion in Detroit. An explosion rocks a neighborhood on Detroit's west side. Fire officials report 6 people were rushed to Detroit Receiving Hospital with second and third degree burns. 2 of the victims also suffered from smoke inhalation. The explosion occurred at a home in the 14400 block of Evergreen around 7:20 p.m. Saturday. Neighbors reported hearing a loud boom that rattled their homes. The Detroit Fire Department and DTE are investigating. So they're saying that this was probably gas. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a second, but I just want to rememberize you here, of course, of the obvious Evergreen reference. But these numbers are also curious. We'll talk about that in a second. 14400 block, and it happened around 7:20 p.m. I also want to point out that 6 people went to the hospital with second and third degree burns. Let me say that again. Second and third degree burns. Now back to my sweet thread. Looks like suburban sprawl territory. Detroit Housing Commission and 2 churches nearby. And you see 2 pictures from Google Maps here. One is backed out and the other one is zoomed in. This is the first one. Right in the center of your screen, 14400 Evergreen Road is where this all went down. And what I really want to point out here, as opposed to any particular buildings, is that this is a really suburban area. I call it suburban sprawl. Tons and tons of housing. And if you'll notice, particularly on the right side of this map, lots of housing here. It looks like to be fairly low income housing. I got a lot of feedback on Twitter that kind of said I was roughly in that ballpark. We're going to talk more about the neighborhood in a bit. But I just want to point out that it's not exactly Bel Air, okay? This is the second picture, zoomed in. And as you can see, it's right across the street from the Detroit Housing Commission. Also very curious. And you've got a church at the top and Rosedale Park Baptist Church at the bottom. So it's in between a couple of churches. But other than that, it really just seems to be housing. Now, back to the thread. Remember the A-Team? They always blew cars up, but cheap cars, not Corvettes and Ferraris. This looks like blow up on a budget. Yeah, the A-Team was an old TV show. You guys probably remember it. If you don't, it featured a ragtag bunch of military misfits that went around saving humanity, and they always blew cars up. It was a dope show. But they didn't blow up Corvettes and Ferraris because ain't nobody got coin for that, right? You got to blow up like old El Caminos and stuff like that. It was still a cool show, but this is blow up on a budget. And that's what I'm suspecting about this story. You can see a picture. This is 14400 Evergreen. And it looks like from at least the time of taking the picture, there was either a tarp over the door or boarding over the door or whatever. But like I said, it looks to be relatively low income housing. It's actually not bad for low income housing, but it doesn't seem to be Bel Air, so this isn't a home of some sort of wealthy doctor or scientist or whatnot, but there were 6 people packed in there. So, seems very suspect. Could just be a gas leak, right? Maybe they were smoking and there was a gas leak and the house blew up. It could happen, and it did happen in 2018. Rough road to live on if you're not into exploding. From April of last year, I said it was last year, it was 2018, but roughly last year. Same road. And I'm going to leave this whole thread for you here so you can check out this video. But this was from April 2018. Another explosion on the same exact road. As you can see, house explodes on Evergreen Road in Detroit. Same exact reasoning. Okay, so it could just be bad gas lines in this area and these houses are exploding. You might want to smoke outside, just saying. And here I say, correction, 2018, not last year. I'm new at this New Year stuff. Okay, so these might very well be some isolated incidents. I'm going to add on a couple other things that might add some color to this story, but I just want to point out that 2 homes exploded in roughly a year's span of time, and they were both on Evergreen Road and both blamed on gas. Now, this next article here happened a few months after the previous explosion, the first explosion. Thanks to Courtney Pyle for picking up what I'm about to throw down, and it takes you to a link to ABC7 Chicago. And this article is from October of 2018. Keep in mind, this would have been a few months after the first explosion. And I'm not necessarily connecting the two, but I just want you to get an idea of the timeline. Remains of 63 fetuses and infants found at Detroit funeral home. And this is a pretty gnarly story, just to warn you right now. Michigan authorities say they found improperly kept remains of fetuses and infants at a second Detroit funeral home just 1 week after similar remains were found at the first. Police and licensed inspectors found the remains of 63 fetuses or infants, some of who died 3 years ago, at Perry Funeral Home on Friday, the Detroit Police Department said. Inspectors raided the funeral home in response to a complaint, the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs said, without releasing details of the complaint. So this was maybe an anonymous tip, it sounds like. 37 of the dead fetuses or infants were found in 3 unrefrigerated boxes, police and the regulatory department said. 26 were in a freezer, police said. Licensing and Regulatory Affairs said it has suspended the funeral home's mortuary science license because of multiple violations of Michigan's public health and occupational codes and an imminent threat to public health and safety. Police have not said any charges have been filed. Detroit Police Chief James Craig said his department is investigated. And let me take you down here a little further. Michigan law says funeral directors generally must supervise a body's final disposition within 60 days of receiving it. Those who don't may be found guilty of at least a misdemeanor, punishable by up to 90 days in prison. For bodies improperly kept beyond 180 days, a director could be charged with a felony, punishable by up to 10 years in prison. Okay, well, that seems to be the case. That's exactly what they did. Some of the 63 sets of remains found at Perry Funeral Home on Friday were fetuses or infants that died in 2015. Licensing and Regulatory Affairs said. Licensing and Regulatory Affairs said the funeral home also failed to certify and file death certificates for the dead bodies of the fetuses and infants for whom they assumed custody with the appropriate governmental authority within 72 hours of death. Okay, let me just stop right there. So this Perry Funeral Home got caught keeping these bodies for way longer than they're supposed to. And they're even clarifying that this goes from misdemeanor to felony charges. Keep in mind, they kind of slipped in there that this was an anonymous tip, but that there was also a previous instance at another place. So this is really, really suspect. A man who answered the phone at Perry Funeral Home on Saturday declined to comment for this story. Now, let me just move you a little bit further down. Friday's discovery came a week after licensing and regulatory affairs workers discovered the remains of 10 fetuses and 1 infant in a drop-down ceiling of a separate former funeral home in Detroit. And all these seem to be unlicensed. They don't have birth certificates. They don't have anything. What are they doing with all of these fetuses? The site of that former business, the Cantrell Funeral Home, was raided October 12th in response to an anonymous letter, authorities said. Okay, so we've got 2 anonymous tips, 2 different raids, both of them yielding something really, really big. So this is obviously some terrible stuff that we're talking about here. It's not easy to talk about it for myself either, but it's important that we understand the real nature of this evil and what's going on and how it kind of lays out and how the whole process happens. That way, when we can understand it, we can begin to sniff it out a little bit. But this was 63 fetuses and infants. This was a lot of children. And of course, there was a previous raid. We don't really know how many there really were. And for those of you who followed my channel for a while, a couple of months back, we reported on an Indiana abortion doctor, former abortion doctor, that he died. And then shortly after he died, they entered his house and found thousands preserved in jars. So this is a big deal. And obviously there's a business behind this. Otherwise they wouldn't be doing this. To just ask why do they do this? Because they're creepy? Maybe. But there obviously seems to be business. Now with this Indiana doctor, they actually had a second raid and found even thousands more. So this is really, really prevalent. Now, if you want to get more information on what we're talking about right now, it's pretty disturbing stuff, but I highly suggest you check out my video from, this looks to be August 29th, entitled Qmap.pub, and this talks about the fetus business, if you will, dealing with whether it's body parts or anything like this. Really disgusting stuff, but mostly dealing with infants and how it relates to trade in Asia, how they use not only the stem cells, the body parts themselves for whether it's luck or some sort of superstition, but also whether they're using the placenta for beauty products. There's all kinds of things that they use this for, but it's extremely creepy and extremely relevant. But that would be Qmap.pub. And then the next one that I suggest, if you've not seen, please watch Infinite Chan, Impossible Food. I believe this was back in September 5th that I made this video, but this talks about Planned Parenthood and how they relate in this and their sale and trafficking of body parts and how they've already been caught doing this. And that's where I'm kind of going with it with this thread. So if you've not caught up, please watch those videos first and you'll get a better idea of what we're doing here moving forward. Now, this says the site of that former business, the Cantrell Funeral Home, was raided October 12th in response to an anonymous letter. Okay, so now we have a picture of the Googly map here, and on the left side is the house explosion, where the house explosion was, and then down here on the right side where it says Perry Funeral Home, you can see that it's a distance of about 10.4 miles. Seems fairly innocuous, but you can see here, this looks to be more like downtown Detroit, and it just becomes really, really suburban here, just tons and tons of housing. But it's oddly close to a Planned Parenthood, and here you can see this is 14400 Evergreen Road, and you see the Planned Parenthood is also about 11.6 miles away. Okay, well, if it's close to the funeral home and it's close to the Planned Parenthood, then we can also see that the Planned Parenthood is dangerously close to the funeral home. You can see 1.1 miles. And if you watch my Infinite Chan Impossible Food, you'll see exactly why that's relevant. So just to be clear, we have right near a massive group of what appears to be low-income housing, probably a lot of minorities, probably a lot of disenfranchised youth, probably a lot of unwanted pregnancies. And over here, we have a Planned Parenthood. And we all know what they do, right? They kind of hook that up, don't they? Their job is to sort of remove those unwanted pregnancies. And over here, we have a funeral home that was caught with multiple things they weren't supposed to have. Do I need to clarify any further, or can we move on? We're moving on. Now, as I've explained in my videos that I just showed you, this is a business, and oddly enough, this seems to be almost a too perfect route here, but this is now from the Planned Parenthood to the nearest FedEx. And as I point out in my video, in my Infinite Chan Impossible Food video, that this was moving back and forth, and we had gotten a couple of different instances in which FedEx got involved shipping baby parts. And we know this because of a case that busted wide open. This was David DeLayden versus STEM Express. And this STEM Express was basically procuring parts, if you will, from groups like Planned Parenthood and delivering them. And they were delivering them via FedEx. And as I point out in those videos, we see time and time again a lot of strange coincidences where we see a close proximity between these Planned Parenthoods and a FedEx. And sure enough, there it is right there, about 1.7 miles. It almost looks like too perfect of a route. Now, when I first, like I said, I don't know this city, but I saw this downtown area and the way it was shaped, and then the way that this traffic pattern kind of went, and the first thought that went through my mind, of course, was tunnels. Oddly enough, I think I'm probably right. But in between this route here is this Cass Technical High School, the Masonic Temple, and Motor City Parking Solutions, and that's right here next to the temple. This temple is absolutely mammoth. And over here, parking solutions, like I point out here, I don't know this city well, but most parking solutions are underground indeed. So it suggests that there likely is a lot going on underground. Now, before we go into this area in a little bit more depth, I want to take you back to the explosion, which occurred at 14400 Evergreen. Well, this is QPOS 1440, dark to light marker. Boom, 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 boom. Well, we definitely did have an explosion. Whether or not that's what Q was referencing, we don't know, but we had a few different booms going on, right? A week to remember, dark to light, blackout necessary. So we have a mention of a blackout. And remember that this event occurred at 7:20 p.m. So we're taking you to Q 720 from back in February 2018. Do people believe all recent resignations, plane crashes, plane reroutes, EMS, EBS activations, blackouts, etc. are simply a coincidence? Why did Sessions, being Jeff Sessions at the beginning, emphasize investigations? Proceedings are kept confidential. Think magic. What you see. So it sounds like Q is reminding us again that we are watching a movie. A lot of these things are going on. We don't necessarily know what is happening, but like I mentioned in my last video, we're essentially at war right now. We're just kind of left here trying to figure out exactly what's happening. Do you really believe nothing is being done? Well, I don't believe that nothing is being done at all. Reread past crumbs. Who has the power? Why was this emphasized in the beginning? You have more than you know. Okay, so I found it very curious that both references that I found here, whether they're connected or not, both of them happen to mention blackouts. All right, well, back to our area. I found a little bit on our Cass High School. The article takes you to Fox 2 Detroit. This is an article from April of 2016. Detroit Public Schools fraud scandal fallout. And there's a video here. They're kind of talking about it for about 6 minutes or so. I'm not going to play it for you, but you can check it out. All of it will be linked inside the thread, and I will link the thread down below. But it says the fallout from the Detroit Public Schools corruption case is the subject tonight. How could so many principals allegedly cheat their students and betray parents? And how could the scandal delay and change the state's bailout of DPS, which is now under consideration in Lansing? And it was just last month that we celebrated the kindness of talk show host Ellen DeGeneres, giving Spain Elementary and Middle School more than $500,000 in donations. Well, that's a lot of coin right there. Gift cards for the teachers and money to fix the roof, computers, and a lot more. Only to find out a few weeks later that the principal, Ronald Alexander, seen smiling and laughing that day, is now facing charges of taking bribes and cheating the children he was supposed to serve. You will hear from parents, teachers, and lawmakers on the $12.3 million scandal. And as you can see here, the third one down is Erica Jones, a teacher at Cass Tech High School. So Cass Tech was indeed part of this, and they were hit with this. Now, we've seen this a lot, right? We've seen this particularly, I've highlighted a lot of this in the Chicago school system, where all this federal money and grant money and Hollywood money and all this philanthropy goes towards these schools, and all we get is a bunch of rich staff, right? And of course, it's always the kids who end up paying, and these kids end up becoming the very residents of that low-income housing. And so you see how it all becomes really cyclical, right? And of course, it's just absolutely disgusting. Now, this is another part where I should probably interject that what I'm kind of going to talk about from here on out is very, very related to this video entitled What the Frick. We were talking about Jeffrey Epstein and his Manhattan apartment, which is right across the street from the Frick Center Art Gallery. How the art business is also another way of funding a lot of this money and funneling a lot of money that probably is being dealt with human trafficking and things like this. But it also kind of shows you a very similar process of what I'm showing you with the map today. Anyway, we move on to this Masonic temple, which is not just a Masonic temple, it's the largest Masonic temple in the world. I wonder if that's relevant. And it takes you to a great little blog thread here. We're not going to cover it because it's going to be really, really long. I am going to parse from it a little bit. But again, linked in the thread. The thread is linked below, so it'll all be encapsulated in this one thread. But this is very interesting, and this is all about a guy's visit to this. And of course, it's probably pretty touristy, but he picks up on a lot of things and actually adds a lot of cool nuggets of wisdom and has a lot of really good things to point out. But there is the building, the largest Masonic temple in the world. And I also want to point out, because there's going to be a lot of people that are going to come at me saying, hey, Patrick, not all Masons are bad, not all Masons are da. I get it. I totally get it. However, I'm not even going to try and not point out that this is really, really suspect considering the location. And there's a little insight in this story too. But as we see down here, probably not. This reeks. And this is a quote from the blog. Lundberg and Kowalski write that the giant tunnels were dug under the streets to bring city steam heat and other utilities into this monstrous building. The tunnels were 34 feet below street level. 34 below street level, which probably means that the boilers were in a third level basement and were 10 feet wide, coming from both Temple Street and 2nd Avenue. Okay, so my suspicions were correct, right? And then this is just another curious part here. This is one of these, I don't know if it's some sort of convention room or meeting room or something like that, but it seems to be that general public can get in this room. But if you can see in the middle of the picture there is a dugout spot right there, a little rectangular dugout spot. Our guide finally addressed the strange panel in the center of the floor that everyone had been staring at, and that, yes, it was someone's grave. They don't tell you who. Who do you think it is? Is that Jimmy Hoffa? Are we looking at Jimmy? Is Jimmy Hoffa right there? I don't know, but we got to get pursuit. Note the pool. I'm not saying, but I might be thinking. This is another picture from the blog of one of the pools. And I'm not going to show you the picture for reference, but I will tell you what it is. We've seen pools like this before. Now, of course, these are old style pools, and I want to allow for the fact that it could just be an old style pool. I get it. But we've seen really weird pools like this. We've seen this at the Vanderbilt Mansion. We've seen these in Rome. We've seen this in particular, though, in reference to Tony Podesta's really crazy art. And there's one particular picture, and I'm not going to show it to you because I'm afraid to get booted off the internet, but you'll be able to find it if you go looking. Tony Podesta, and there are children in the picture, kneeling in what appears to be a pool that looks a lot like this. And we've seen pictures that had some what looked to be blood stains on the bottom of the pool. Really, really odd stuff. Those kids were wearing those red shoes that we've talked about so many times. It was just really disturbing stuff. This pool reminds me of that. Now, like I said, rich people built pools probably like this, so it doesn't necessarily mean that every pool that is built like this is one of those pools. And again, I'm not saying that all Masons are creepy. I'm just not. It's not the case. There are thousands of them all over the world, and there are a lot of different kind of factions within Freemasonry. So please don't come at me with that stuff. I don't have time for that. All I'm trying to point out is the creepiness that we do see. Okay. I see world's largest MT, well-funded tunnels. Being Masonic temple, well-funded tunnels near Planned Parenthood and funeral homes, as well as much of a downtown, theaters, stadiums, which imply more tunnels. Yeah, the Fox Theater is right around there. There's the Detroit Stadium around there. There's a whole Tiger Stadium. All that stuff is right around there, so there's probably a lot more tunnels there, to move things, as well as nearby urban housing for low-income families and disenfranchised youth, high crime and poor elderly, and a funeral home with a rap sheet. And now, 2 explosions. That would mean very little to any elite trying to cover their tracks. Yeah, I don't know if these explosions had anything to do with what I just showed you here at all. But I do find it very curious. Now, it could just be a story of a poor neighborhood with a bad gas line, and that happened to lead me to some of this other stuff that I saw. But either way, it was very, very creepy, and it seems to make sense that if you wanted to get rid of something, just blowing it up like we've seen. Because we've seen more and more that blowing up houses seems to become very commonplace. We've reported on it numerous times over the last couple of years. So obviously it's going to be suspect, given that they both happened on Evergreen, and how much we've seen in regards to the reference of Evergreen. There seems to be a lot of teeth to this. Now, I got to say, this article is really, really fun and informative from Nailhead. And once again, this is linked in the Thread Reader app. So when you get that, you'll get all the links within that thread, for those of you who don't know. But I do want to point out, he goes a little bit into Aleister Crowley's exploits in Detroit, which I do think might be a little bit relevant to the area. Now, at the time, he was sort of trying to create this Grand Lodge, this sort of overseer of Freemasonry, if you will, because that Aleister Crowley ain't trying to ride the bench, right? So that kind of failed, but it sort of shows the struggle within Freemasonry and all the different dynamics that go on there. I'm, of course, not an expert, but I'm bright enough to know that there are lots of different factions going back and forth. But, of course, Aleister Crowley had some really sick ideas, and he had his following, including in Detroit. And this blog talks a little bit about it, and, multiple orgies and how they had kind of really all sorts of deviant action going on. And this led to resignations, and this led to firings, and of course a lot of divorces and things like this. This, of course, was back in the day. But it was also very clear that the company Park Davis, which is a big pharmaceutical company, was in town, and he was probably trying to stock up on mescaline, which he was actually known to inject his crowd with. And also, Park Davis was the first company to start producing PCP, what we now know as PCP. So very interesting stuff there. But of course, that starts to get into a lot of different symbolism. In particular, the reason I mention it is that it has a lot to do with Chaldean symbolism, ancient Chaldean symbolism, and a lot of that has a lot of similarities to Jeffrey Epstein. And of course, that's another link between this and the What the Frick video. But a lot of that artwork and that we've seen around in Syria, and we've seen it on Jeffrey Epstein's temple. A lot of that was a nod to the Chaldeans. So some very interesting stuff, although it does get off topic, but I do want to share because I think that it is definitely worth your read. Now, let me share you one last story that I thought was interesting and fairly relatable. This is from May 30th, 2019, so a handful of months ago. This comes by way of Anon. Thanks for sharing this with me. I found this very interesting. Body of one man recovered from plane that crashed in Lake Michigan. You may remember this story. Michigan State Police report they found the body of one of the men who was on a plane that went down on May 12th in Lake Michigan. The body of Emmanuel Manos of Monroe was found at around 8 p.m. on May 29th, according to the Michigan State Police. The plane was found last week 4.5 miles off the coast of Frankfurt in about 515 feet of water. Manos' body was recovered in about 523 feet of water and slightly southeast of where the wreckage of the plane was found, troopers report. The search for Randall Dippold of Perry continues. Perry, that was the name of the funeral home. Manos and Dippold were flying from Ontonagon. Is that how do I say Ontonagon, to Monroe County, where their engine stalled. Manos' remains have been turned over to the medical examiner. Okay, so this appears to be the plane right here, N1561Z. Well, would you look at that? Here it is over here. Who is it registered to? Evergreen Exploration, LLC. Well, this is just all kinds of yikes. Another Evergreen in Michigan. And well, this Anon did such great research that I wanted to share some notes actually from the email. And forgive me, I'm going to keep you anonymous. I don't know if you wanted me to shout you out or not. But thank you very much for laying it out like this for me. Anyway, this Emmanuel Z. Manos, who evidently has registered this plane to Evergreen LLC, graduated from Michigan Technological University in Houghton. I'm assuming that's Houghton, Michigan, with it might be Houghton, with a bachelor's degree in mining engineering. Watch 99% of my comments be about Houghton. Purchased Caledonia Copper Mine. And first experience with underground mining was at the White Pine Copper Mine. White Pine's an evergreen, isn't it? In the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Helped to reopen Detroit's salt mine in 1997 and worked 22 years of his life to Detroit Salt Company, named president of DSC in 2010. And then you see a bullet point list of some of the projects that he's worked on. Some obviously very big projects. This guy was very influential, worked on some really big projects. Probably knew a lot of stuff too, right? But let's get to what Anon finds odd about all this. First of all, pilot Randy Dippold's obituary doesn't mention flying for Evergreen LLC. Dippold's address is a distance from Monroe, Michigan, south of Detroit. Manos' address also has a Howell, Michigan address listed. The plane was flying to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan on a Sunday afternoon night in May. The Upper Peninsula is rife with old abandoned mines. The area is rugged, remote, and often there is still snow on the ground in May. You know what? Other areas rugged and remote? Kauai in Hawaii. And we've been having a lot of plane crashes over there too, haven't we? A video on www.WNEM.com once showed a sheriff talking about seemed like he was feigning sadness about the plane going down in 600-foot deep water of Lake Michigan. Now the video is scrubbed. Yeah, and it turned out to be 523 feet. They made sure to memorize us of that, right? And then this anon says, did they fake death? The plane stalled out near shore. I wonder if the plane could glide to the beach. I am trying to find the wind speed and direction for that day. If the wind was strong out to the east, the plane could probably glide a while. Well, there was a lot more to your research there, and thank you very much for sharing that. I thought this was very, very interesting in light of the current events. So I need to move forward in order to get this video out in time for you today, but big thanks to you, Anon. They also did some other great research showing a bunch of different quote-unquote humanitarian groups attached to the Detroit salt mines. One in particular was the Make-A-Wish Foundation. So there was a lot of great work there, once again kind of connecting everything right back to the kids. And if you follow my channel for quite some time, you kind of really are just putting more pieces together. But if you're not really understanding what all this means, what we've done over the last couple of years, in particular in reading the maps, Q always says, follow the map. And although I don't think that Q's talking about the googly maps, what I find is that when I find the lay of the land of a particular place, it really starts to tell its own story, and stories kind of fill themselves in. But what we've seen is that there's this obvious control of pharmaceutical companies, which are distributed amongst this low-income groups, and it's always so casually laid out, right? And of course, these low-income groups and people who come from either broken homes or whatnot, they create disenfranchised youth, and of course, that leads to unwanted pregnancies, and of course, that's where Planned Parenthood can step in and take this, what is now a booming business around the industry, selling parts from that. And so it's basically just this big, huge machine, right? And of course, they control the schools that are located in there too, which just leads to more disenfranchised youth. So when we start to see those steps, they all kind of contribute to each other. And then, of course, we've seen a pattern of how there's all these tunnels going underneath all these big cities to influential buildings. And of course, a big byproduct of what we see here leads to more human trafficking, because it's a lot easier to abduct kids who maybe didn't come from registered parents, or they're, maybe they're here illegally, or, who knows what their story could be. There's a numerous amount of reasons. And of course, those people then can be leaked out into Hollywood or modeling. And that's how it all goes around the world. And oftentimes we see that companies that happen to be named Evergreen happen to facilitate that shipping. So there you go. Big thanks to you, Anon. Now, before I move you on to the last story, I want to share you one last thing from another Anon who wishes to remain anonymous. And for this, we're going to the mailbag. Check the mail, y'all. Check the mail, y'all. This comes by way of Motor City Anon, who was responding to my thread that we just covered. Uncle grew up in Detroit and worked for various companies, including the City of Detroit and Cobo Arena, now known as the TCF Center, where he was responsible for repairs and even the sealing off of the older, unused tunnel passageways. Uncle told us that there are miles and miles of tunnels running underground from building to building, and that they are wide enough for 2 semi-trucks to drive side by side. From his personal experience, these tunnels connect to industrial buildings, enormous salt mines. We're just talking about weird missile silos, World War II bunkers, and even run under the Detroit River into Canada. Uncle told us during one of his visits into the tunnels that he wandered into a World War II military office that had been suddenly abandoned. He described a secretary's desk where there were personal objects, including a picture frame and a vase with dead flowers. The room had walls of shelves with labeled glass vials and jars, with different liquids, and long tables with books and files left out on them. To work down in the tunnels was good money, but even with that, most workers were brought in from out of state because the local black population was deathly scared and believed there were evil entities living in the tunnels, including ghosts and man-eating rats. I don't even know if I should tell you about the man-eating rats because it may ruin any credibility to the rest of the stories. But our uncle and the rest of the old-timers who worked in and around the tunnels near the Detroit River swear they existed. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I've been in some sketchy places around the world, and I've seen some rats big enough to come and bum a smoke off you. So I'm going to say that I think it's very possible, but there you go. I'm going to take you to another story here. This is Q Post 947 from the 16th of March, 2018, where Q says Iran next. Well, this was something that we were looking at kind of quizzically last time. We've teased with Iran quite a few times, and of course, Iran was in the news at that time too. But then we see this real-time days after, or we're not really sure. It could be RT, could be the network RT. But I'm starting to wonder if this means real-time days after, because here we have this incident in Kenya. And oddly enough, right now, we're seeing something very similar here. We had this embassy raided in Kenya. And let me take you over to the official statement. This is from U.S. Africa Command, attack on Manda Bay airfield, Kenya, and we're not going to go through this whole thing. It's just a little bit right here. But indeed, they were making this big deal out of this. And I want to point out that I've seen some reports go around online that a naval base was attacked. That seems to be incorrect. I don't believe we have a naval base in Kenya. This is an airfield. But remember, Manda Bay, boy, that sounds a lot like Mandalay Bay, right? Kind of gets our ears perked up already, doesn't it? Well, this group, Al-Shabaab, is a group that is sort of, I don't even know how to describe them, but this goes right back to Ilhan Omar, her support for them. She has supported a lot of different corporations that tend to fund Al-Shabaab. She's not necessarily brought up Al-Shabaab by name, but of course I think we all kind of get the idea with her, right? But this is sort of another Mujahideen, another Hezbollah, and of course I imagine that this was simply a result of the attack on Iran. Generally, when we attack some big leader or something like that, all these different factions start getting all bent out of shape, and they make their attacks. And it looks like Q might have been onto this, but back to the post, because it seems to all fall in line, right? Real time, days after, real time, Kenya, no coincidences, track, important, MB, and of course we would have assumed MB to mean Muslim Brotherhood. Oftentimes it is, right? But of course, I just showed you the airfield is Manda Bay, and there was a boom there, so there's another boom for you. What do you think? I don't know. Just saying. All right, Patriots, that's all I got for you for now. As always, if you like this video, please click like, share, and subscribe. Thanks to all of you who do that already. And if you want to join me on one of my alternate platforms, which I highly suggest that you do, they will all be linked down below in the video description. If you've got information for me, please email me. Please do not DM me on social media. Please email me. That's linked down below also. And my P.O. box is down there if you'd like to send something. And if you'd like to support the channel, my Patreon is also linked down below. I post all of my threads on my Patreon, and you don't need to be a patron to check it out. It's all free, so you can go over there if you'd like to see that. And of course, like I just said, that's also linked down below. All in the video description. The thread from today will be in the video description. It's a thread reader app link. And inside that, you will find the other links to the videos and the stories and all that if you're not familiar with how those work. All right, Patriots, that's all I got for you for now. Until next time, stay frosty.